Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our NutriNews International's NutriInsights series. My name is Álvaro Guzman, and I am part of the editorial staff here at NutriNews International. And today we are very pleased to be joined by Dr. Marcos Rostagno, who has extensive experience both in academia and the industry, working with poultry and swine. And today we'll explore some of the biggest challenges and innovations associated with the control of Salmonella and on a broader picture, improving gut health and supporting sustainable production practices. So, Dr. Rostagno, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward for our conversation.
Thank you very much. So, before we jump into our topics of the day, would you mind giving us a brief overview of your career path?
Yes, it's a typical career path. I've been in multiple countries, multiple areas, but it's been a very rewarding career. I am a veterinarian, always focused in monogastrics, particularly poultry and swine, my whole career. Did my graduate studies in infectious disease and epidemiology. Always worked for many years in academia, including in terms of salmonella ecology and epidemiology, antimicrobial resistance, gut microbiome, feed additives and gut health. A lot of these areas are all connected with microbiology, but more applied. Started my career in Brazil, Latin America, then moved to the US, ended up staying here, worked for a few years in academia as well at Purdue University, then moved to industry, worked a few years with Elanco Animal Health, then with phytobiotics, and more recently, in the past 3+ years, I've been working with Trow slash Celco, a Nutreco company in the United States.
That's great. Thank you for giving us a little bit of your background. Certainly very interesting and having that expertise and knowledge both in academia and the commercial side of things with industry. So that definitely brings a very nice perspective into some of the topics we want to talk about today. So, for starters, and looking at the big picture, from your perspective, what are some of the main challenges the industry still faces when controlling salmonella at the farm level? From your experience, what strategies do you think have proven most effective in the recent years?
Well, yeah, this Salmonella challenge, let's call it that way, it's been around for quite a while, and it is a persistent challenge. It's perceived in different ways, but I think a major challenge that I see from the applied point of view, particularly in industry, is the persistence of a simplistic mindset. I call that is that constant expectation of a magic bullet, right? Something to solve my problem. Hey, every time I visit a customer, hey, can you recommend me an additive, an intervention, something I can do to take care of this challenge? That's a little difficult. It's not how it works. Someone else, it's very complex, right? There are multiple moving parts when you try to understand, but it's not really complicated. What I mean, it's complex, but not complicated. It's just because it's spread all over the production and processing chain. So a control program, let's say, to be effective or successful, number one, it needs to be very broad, very comprehensive. It needs to include the entire chain. Let's say an integrated company decides to do something, they need to apply or focus on the entire chain, not in specific areas only. So that requires commitment from multiple teams, the higher management level, requires coordination between these different links of the whole chain. And of course, I tell people also it requires time or persistence, right? It's very common for them to start and then a few weeks, a couple of months go by and they say, well, we're not seeing results. Let's change things. It takes time. This is a slow process. It's a very complex system. So every link in this chain that I just mentioned is connected. And whatever happens in one link will have an impact in the subsequent part or link of that chain. So that adds on to the probability of success of a program or a salmonella control program. So what I tell people also is understanding that we tend to focus, I'll say, what's your problem? My problem is salmonella. Well, really not salmonella. Salmonella is the outcome of the problem, right? Is what results from a series of events, right? Which leads to that risk of having salmonella. That risk in itself, just by definition, is a probability. So once you focus on these events or these factors along the chain, your purpose, your goal becomes, how do I create obstacles to reduce my risk of salmonella happening or being found in my system? And that includes everything, as I just mentioned, from pre to post harvest, everything is connected. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have today. We have a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of people that have generated a lot of information, but it's just taking a step back and understanding the whole complex scenario and acting accordingly. I think that is really what is a big challenge that I see in most companies that I visit until today.
Yeah, yeah, I think that is very true and very wise way to look at it. And it's not there's not a one size fits all solution, right? You got to look at the problem from all the different perspectives, and it also needs to be addressed that way. So I think that's very true. And
Mhm.
following up on that, and I think you would agree, and you mentioned that, of course, biosecurity and management practices are very important as part of this, and they are always emphasized. But how can these tie into nutrition, and how can farms use nutrition as part of their overall strategy to reduce salmonella?
Uh, that's a good point. When you think at the farm, right, just the production side. Remember, as I mentioned, the chain. This is one link of the
Mhm.
chain. I would say probably here you connect based on these three areas that you touched: biosecurity, management, and nutrition. You touched to two very closely tied together links: is the feed mill, right, the feed manufacturing, and the production farm. So all these three areas are day to day when you work in a farm: biosecurity, all the management practices that happen during the day, and of course the feed is the main input that is constantly coming in. So these three are interconnected. They're all critical. It's not one is more important than the other. No, you have to think of them, as I mentioned before. Each one of them has its own contribution. So you have to do a multi-pronged approach on this. So if you apply it to one individually, let's say, oh, I'm going to focus on the nutrition, or I'm going to focus on management, or just the biosecurity, you're not going to solve the problem. The challenge will persist. It will continue to happen. So if we tease each one of them briefly apart, because each one of them is a topic in itself, for biosecurity management practice, usually the goal with everything we do within those two areas is to keep contamination levels very low. Why? Because that minimizes dissemination, minimizes the scale up. Of course, also affects the persistence, the risk of persistence of the bacteria in the environment. So everything we do is to avoid that disseminating. Then when you focus on nutrition, that are different ways of looking at this. When you look at nutrition, you first look at the diet itself, the feed, right? So you have to understand that the ingredients may be a potential source of salmonella. So that's why I said it connects to the feed mill. The feed mill also needs this biosecurity, these its own management practices there. One of them is paying attention to the microbial quality of the feed ingredients, right? Because they may be carrying, not may, but it's very common for them to have some of these ingredients. So one is them, the feed, or what you formulate, what you put in that feed, that could be a vehicle or a source of that salmonella entering in your system, in your production farm. But then there is the other side of nutrition, which is how you formulate that diet, not only in ingredients, and I'm using the term ingredients more to the macro, let's say the main ingredients, but you also have the additives that go into that formulation. what you're trying to do there is create an environment in the gut of these animals that it's unfavorable to pathogens, in this case to Salmonella. So it also connects or links to creating a challenge for Salmonella to colonize and infect the birds or the animals, and at the same time reduce the shedding, the environmental contamination, the persistence, the same way we're thinking in terms of biosecurity, cleaning, management practice. So all three of them, as you, I hope I was able to exemplify how they connect to each other and how there are multiple hurdles that you create as obstacles for Salmonella to take over the farm.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I want to follow up on what you mentioned about moving towards the animal and making sure the animal has what we consider a healthy gut, or that helps it be more resistant or resilient regarding infections by Salmonella. Eh, Diving a little bit more into that. So, what's the role that gut health plays in, you already mentioned a little, on helping the animal be more resistant to infections in Salmonella, and how does maintaining a balanced, like microbial ecosystem, influence that?
Wow, that's a very hot topic nowadays. That's gut health, intestinal health,
Yeah.
and gut microbiome, microbiota, microbiology, anything you want to call it. The key word you just used there that I try to emphasize is the balance, right? First of all, I try to tell people understand the concept of intestinal health or a balanced microbiome or any other components. When you talk about intestinal health, you're talking about multiple systems that operate within that tube, which is the digestive system, right? So, what I say is intestinal health is basically a state of balance or a state of equilibrium, or what I call homeostasis, right? So, what we're trying to do is to maintain that homeostasis in the animal, avoid any disruption, because like many other pathogens, Salmonella will take advantage. If that equilibrium, that homeostasis is disturbed, you will have an imbalance, and then you start having opportunities for Salmonella and or other pathogens to take over and start at least, or if not causing a disease, you open up the opportunity for them to start multiplying, reversing everything we just discussed in the question before, where we try to maintain levels very low. And all of a sudden, you open up the opportunity, even if there is no disease in the animal, but this pathogen finds an opportunity, a niche in the gut to multiply, then being shed in high quantities, contaminate the environment, and repeat that cycle across the whole population that is in that house. So when we think on these three, in these, we need to think in three key areas. It's physiology, immunology, and microbiology. So when you think in terms of physiologies, a lot of people don't put a whole lot of attention in this area when you think intestinal health. It's the very basic functioning of the intestinal tract, right? Basic things like the motility and the digestive passage rate, right? That has a tremendous impact on fermentation processes, ability of microorganisms to colonize, to stay more time in specific portions of the intestinal tract, and so forth. That also has consequences on the pH and in different regions of the intestinal tract. There is also mucus production. Mucus is very, very important in terms of blocking access to the mucosa, and that making it difficult for microorganisms to colonize, to establish their own habitat. So you can go on this, but just to show how the basic physiology, the basic function is a very important piece of the intestinal health. So these are the basic determining the overall conditions, the environmental conditions in the gut. Then you move to the immune system, which is another component of the gut and the gut health. Everybody knows, we've seen many presentations, publications that at least 70% of all the immune system, the cells that are components of the immune system, are spread along the intestinal tract. So it is a very strong component of intestinal health. So, and we all know that the immune system is crucial for preventing colonization, invasion, translocation, and things like that. So it's a no-brainer how to understand that the immune system is important. And the third component is the microbial ecosystem, which is also very important because it plays a variety of different roles. Nowadays, people are calling it the new brain of the body, it interacts with everything. There's a lot of literature, a lot of people talking about this. And I don't want to keep going on, but very basically, everybody in our industry understands how the microbiota plays a very important role on competitively exclude pathogens by a variety of different mechanisms, but basically are trying to exclude, attack, counteract those pathogens so they can establish themselves in the intestinal tract. So then you can see all these different components of the intestinal tract defining their balance. So not only the microbial population, but also how these three interact with each other to keep that homeostasis, that balance in the intestinal tract, and protect the animals from pathogens, colonization, persistence, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is a fascinating topic in itself and one that we can talk for hours and hours. But thank you for doing a good effort of putting it in simple and summarized terms. So thank you for that. And moving a little bit more into the pathogen control and how things have shifted over the past decade or more, we know and we are well aware that the industry is under a lot of pressure to reduce antimicrobial use. And over these past years and throughout your experience, how have you seen producers and companies adapt to this necessary reduction in antimicrobial use? And what lessons do you think have been learned along the way in industry and amongst producers?
Well, this is a great topic for discussion. Depending on who you're discussing this with, it can get really heated. It can get really controversial because there are all kinds of opinions and visions and perspectives and rationales. And it is true. There are all these different facets to this topic that you can look. I've been working on this as a veterinarian for many, many years now. But it does deserve a lot of attention, right? Especially as veterinarians, as responsible for the well-being of the animals under our own responsibility. Plus, as veterinarians, we do play a very, very important role in public health, and right. And nowadays, everything is One Health. So over the last few years, there's been a lot happening in the industry, shifts one way or the other. But there is also a very distorted picture because exactly of these different facets and approaches. We like any change, right? It takes time, and it's always very. The journey is always bumpy. I say there's always bumps and challenges and one step forward, two step back, two step forward, one step back, and it goes back and forth. Plus, there is no concerted approach or plan, or that everybody knows and accepts. As I mentioned right in the beginning here, when I started this comment, it's important, right? Veterinarians have a big role, but nobody ever took the time to really develop a concise and push and build a consensus across regions, countries, states, companies, right? Different areas of the same company. We see so many different approaches, perspectives, opinions, and it creates a lot of noise. However, one thing I learned and we learn with experience is it's inevitable. It's coming in different speed and different in a different process, more or less bumpy, messy, faster or slower, but it's inevitable. It's something that will have to happen. And I say that, and a lot of people question me, well, so you are in favor, you think we need to protect the human health or the public health? I say, yes, but it's not just because of public health. I'm also, as I mentioned at the beginning, is important from the perspective of the animal's health. These are, and as a veterinarian, I truly believe and pledge and say and invoke on saying that antibiotics are extremely important in the tools of the hands of veterinarians for them to fulfill their oath, their responsibility of protecting the health and well-being of these animals. So we need to preserve these tools. Otherwise, it's not just thinking what's happening in humans and everything. It will eventually start affecting animals the same way, right? Even though the life cycle of these animals is short, but there are consequences. There are different ways of looking at this. And so we need to be more careful about this, but doing it the right way. So what I say the challenge in the industry is also beyond this, all this confusion, controversy, and all discussion is that the real challenge, I say, is the current production systems, what we have today that we've been using for decades now. We've been tweaking it, improving, but the base is basically the same that was developed decades ago. This approach, these production systems, they were developed with the support of antibiotics. We were able to get there with the antibiotics as support tools for that, and it worked great. That's why we got, and the industry is so competitive in that. However, removing that support tool, of course, will cause noise, will cause problems, right? And so that requires a change or on way of thinking, on the way we do things, and or what I call paradigm shifts. We need to start thinking different. And this is difficult, it's challenging. Humans resist change. Our industry is very conservative. Although we use a lot of technology, we still, compared to other industries, are more conservative. So we resist a lot of change. Well, things are working. Why are we going to change? And things like that. Well, it's with a mindset of anticipating the future and starting to move before you are forced to make that change. So how do I anticipate? How do I prepare myself slowly and progressively before the storm, right? Before it all falls on my lap and now I don't have the opportunity. So I think that's what people ask me. Well, and then I've given talks and people ask me, hey, is it better to produce chickens with or without antibiotics? I said, there's no better or worse. It's different. You have to think different, right? When you shift to that mindset, then your mindset is more less in terms of controlling disease, and it becomes more on preventing disease or pathogens, right? It's along the lines of what we were talking until a little bit. Salmonella, you focus, you start, okay, my problem, my disease, my pathogen is the outcome. I need to start focus on what allows that outcome to happen, right? So with that said, we have to recognize that some companies, this is not across the whole industry. Some companies are doing a great job of that. Some companies are being successful in that. In different countries, I've seen many companies that are successful, capable of doing that. But there are also others that are being resistant or even struggling. You see companies that tried, reversed, and or trying again, or tried in different locations but not in others. But again, bottom line is, in my say, usually when people ask me, is it's an inevitable future that we will have to face at some point. So you might as well start getting prepared now and thinking about it before you are forced to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. As you say, it's something that's already upon us. It's a true and serious problem. I do agree that it's been tackled maybe from like not in the sense that it's bad that it's been tackled from different ways, but there hasn't been like a concerted approach towards it, or maybe considering all the different stakeholders. I know it's difficult to do it that way. Eh, but it's something that we need to address. There's no
Mhm.
escaping it. So we have to find the best way to do it. And I think, as you say, finding alternatives, working on prevention is probably one of the best ways to do
Mhm.
it. And actually, on that note, there's a lot of companies and a lot of products developing alternative to antimicrobials or what we used to know as growth promoters and all sorts of those kinds of products. And we always are trying to see which feed additive might best work as an alternative. And maybe the answer to that is that there's not just one feed additive, as you said, that's gonna solve all the questions. But on this nutritional side of things, which feed additives or functional ingredients do you see as some of the most promising for supporting gut health and allowing the animal to be more resilient or resistant to certain infections? You already talked a little bit about this regarding
Mhm.
Salmonella, but focusing more on the actual feed additives, or if you have any specific examples that you can mention.
Mhm. Well, I was smiling as you got into this question because one thing that drives me crazy in this topic is, and of course, besides what I mentioned to Salmonella about Salmonella, the same thing happens when you talk about feed additives and antibiotics is the magic bullet mindset. That right? Forget it. The system we work is very complex. It's not going to happen, right? We're past that point of complexity to have simple solutions. So you have to think different. But more than that, I was smiling because I tell people, I'll take the opportunity here to say what we need to do first if we want to really be successful and we really change and we really want to get on our way of changing that mindset, shifting paradigms and the way we think and look at these challenges. We need to stop what I said with the antibiotic alternatives madness. We have to stop using that term, that terminology. For me, it drives me crazy. We are not, as long as you stay focused on simply replacing antibiotics, you will fail miserably, right? Antibiotics is just another technology. You are finding what you're looking is for different technologies and different approaches to manage your challenges in a different way. So if you just look for, say, hey, I have to stop using antibiotics, what can I use to replace it and maintain my performance? It's going to be a hit and miss. It's going to be a lot of trial and error to get there, right? And it's going to cost you a lot of money, right? So what I say is, first we have to understand, just reinforcing so your listeners are not think, oh, Marcos is against us antibiotics. I'm not. I just want to make sure that we use them the right way and we protect them for the future of veterinarians. They're going to need it and we need them. And I don't see new antibiotics, particularly for animals, becoming available anytime soon. So we need to be very smart and how we use these tools because we're going to need them for decades ahead. So we need to be careful. That said, moving on. Yeah, we talk about changing the mindset, looking for different ways. There are so many technologies available. And you can go, the top of my head, you can go with the first group, like the pro, pre, syn, post biotics, right? Then you go to organic acids, then you go to enzymes, then you go to minerals, then you go to phytogenics, and we can go on and on this. So all these are important, valuable technologies, but understand that they have different targets, different mode of actions, different ways of operating or generating an effect, right? So we need to understand what's the problem that I'm trying to solve so I can choose the right technology and apply it at the right time, the right way. It's not just take this out, put this in, and let's see. This is just try and error. It's not. You're gonna fail most of the time because, as I said, the complexity and everything. So we need to shift that attention. On top of that, what we just talked about in Salmonella, a few questions before, is not just the feed additive, right? It's also the nutrition, the management, the biosecurity, the human resources. We have these very complex systems, right? But we still have people in there managing, making decisions, executing protocols every single day. So having a highly trained team, they understand and know why they're doing things and wanted to do that. So we have to understand that solving these underlying challenges or that will lead to the outcomes, which are a pathogen, salmonella, a food safety, or a disease issue, we need to go deeper. We need to understand, again, as I mentioned the question before, the system that we use today, right, was developed with the support of antibiotic. So just removing it, yeah, there will be consequences. What do I need to adjust? What do I need to tweak in my system? And it will change from system to system because the weather is different, the age of the house is different, so on, so on. We can keep going here, right? And so I have to understand that, okay, we need to go a little deeper to get that. It needs to be structured and well thought through. That's why I was saying before, you need time to develop this plan, to execute, to get it will affect your business. I need a flow of birds and what kind of birds I'm pursuing, I'm producing for which industry, where I'm going to sell, what are my contracts, all these, how much margin I have that I can play with or not, take more or less risk, go faster, slowly. It's a business, right? All this. So the problem here is unfortunately not grasp this concept or resist to this concept. I think it's a little bit of human nature. It's trying to make everything simple and trying to just give me a quick solution, just give me a magic bullet. I already have plenty of problems to deal with. I don't have time. I don't want to do it. Well, at some point you will have to do it. So start doing it now before you get caught by surprise.
Yeah, those are a lot of very valid and interesting thoughts and topics you mentioned. And I really liked when you said that it's non-feasible to consider productions without antibiotics in a sense that they're another tool, right? Like we
Mhm.
all recognize that antimicrobial resistance is a problem that we need to deal with, but we do need to acknowledge that they are just another tool in our toolbox, and we have to use them prudently, have good stewardship programs, look for other tools that might be also helpful, but trying to just find replacements or believe that we can just do it by having a perfect feed additive that's going to solve all your problems. That's very naive, and I think
Mhm.
everyone understands at the end of the day that that doesn't work like that. These are very complex systems and very complex challenges to find simple solutions to them, right?
Mhm.
We would
Mhm.
like to,
Yeah.
but it's not that way. We don't have that silver
Mhm.
bullet, as you mentioned. And
It's what I tell people. It's
yeah,
people when I start discussing these things and they say, well, but wow, this is complex. There's a lot of moving parts and all that. And I say, well, are you crazy? Why do you work in this area? And I tell them it's job security. We have a lot to do for a long time. That's the good part of it. There's a lot to have fun with.
yeah, that is definitely true. There's a lot of things that still need to be addressed. So it's a big motivation to keep diving into this field. And as you say, it's
Mhm.
very nice and certainly very interesting. And when we're looking, I know you mentioned that there's no single intervention that will save the day or replace what has been done previously. But we always know that producers and the industry in general wants to have science-backed products. Producers want to know why they're using what they're using. But sometimes it is also true that evaluating or assessing the interventions that are put in place or a certain feed additive can be pretty challenging. So I wanted to just ask or for your thoughts on what are some of the key scientific and practical challenges when assessing the real efficacy of using a feed additive in your herd or your flock, eh, or also when validating or trying to review health control programs at farms. Like, what are some of the biggest challenges you see currently in the
Yeah,
industry?
when you look at these you have to look at both sides of the coin, right? One is, yeah, as you mentioned, these problems are complex, these challenges are complex, and developing solutions to them is also a difficult task. And that's a big challenge we have. And I'll say by far is the challenge we have. And this is there are no, for most of them, there are no good, reliable, or consistent models that you can use to replicate exactly what will happen in the field, because things in the field not only they include more variables, but they change constantly, right? And so, but we still need to do some scientific assessment and the development of all these tools, these feed additives, these components. We need to understand their mode of action. We need to understand the basics of it, so we can at least say, okay, how do I apply in the field that concept, that tool, that mode of action? Does it fit with what I'm looking for, what I'm dealing with, or not? Right. So that is one side of the coin that is a big challenge from the scientific side. We have a lot of people working in a lot of these areas that we just touched as we discuss here in this hour, but most of them are very complex, as I mentioned, multifactorial, very, very difficult to replicate. That's why most of the time you go talk to a producer, a customer, and you let take them some papers, some experiments that were done in the development of the product, so forth. Yes, you need that, as I said, to give them something to react to, something for them to try and think about, well, how is this technology valuable to me? How can I bring it into my own production system? Does it offer me an opportunity to deal with some of my challenges, right? Then what's going to happen is they're going to say, well, we need to test it now under my conditions, under commercial or field conditions, right? And that's when the other side of the coin comes into play. Conditions to reliably, consistently test these products or evaluate these interventions, what I call in the field, are not adequate, are not there. The systems were not developed to do science, to do testing, right? They are done to produce animals and go through and be efficient. And so replicates, oh, when you start getting into science, statistic, it becomes slippery, right? It's very difficult to. So I see a lot of these products and company investing a lot of time, money, and efforts doing scientific approaches and papers, publications, and then they go to the field. No, let's put this house against that and let's see what happens, right? It may work today, and the next cycle it doesn't, or vice versa. It doesn't work today. Oh, get it out. Maybe if you leave it there, it will work in the next one. And so it's a challenge from both sides of the coin that I see. So there are just too many variables. Dealing with this, it's a very it's not an easy task. It's a very challenge. And as I said before, there is a lot of trial and error, and I think we need to do a better job in both sides for that. But connecting to your previous question, I'm more and more skeptical of single solutions, magic bullets. What I think most of these challenges will require is more collaboration between companies that are trying to develop these tools and companies or their customers. They will need these tools in the field to develop, I don't know if the right term will be combinations or packages of solutions with different technologies to solve these complex problems. You're not going to do it with a single. And since a lot of these companies, or maybe these technologies will come from different companies, it will be dependent on the customer side to really pick and choose. And I think they're in a perfect position to do that. You have all these technologies available, and you're being exposed to all of them. Because you have all these companies approaching, being a nutritionist, a vet, whoever, and you get exposure to all these technologies, and you know the problems that you live day in, day out. Okay, how do I can I mix match? How can I use this to solve my problems? I think that's where eventually we're going to go in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think it's more like tailored, as you say, solutions or packages, and the end user has to be more conscious about it and be the one that decides what tools does he need from the different providers and how those work in his specific scenario under specific conditions, uh, taking into account that these are very
Mhm.
complex and dynamic systems, right? And that there's
Yeah.
obviously not a one size fits all and a solution. And jumping into that, and you kind of gave me the perfect I fit into this is looking into what's coming ahead and into future innovations or trends. What do you see shaping the future of salmonella control and pathogen control, as well as intestinal health management within animal production? What are the trends you see for the coming years, both from the industry side and also from academia? Are they aligned? Are they not? What are your thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball or I can't predict the future. I wish I could, right? I wouldn't be here, but but yeah, I think as we went through all these topics, and I think through this is there is plenty of knowledge and technologies available, right? Both in all these areas, in salmonella, intestinal health, antibiotic use, right? All these approaches. But there are also a lot of obstacles or constraints, right? This is a very complex topic for discussion, and we can go on and on, not only discussing your question and what I'm trying to answer, but also just discussing these constraints and obstacles will be a topic on itself. But let's put that on the side now, maybe for another opportunity. But back to the question, in terms of innovation and trends, I believe that what eventually will happen is that the way we look at these challenges I mentioned before, and the way we approach them to solve, to intervene, will change. We will have to change or shift paradigms and understand, okay, we need to make some changes here on the basics of how we produce these animals, how we raise them, how we maintain them. Yes, we have to stop this cost. Okay, let's start putting in terms of cost and opportunities, cost and benefits, cost and different business models. How can we do? Some companies I can see starting to think that way, but it's still very punctual. It's not spread that mindset. The majority of the industry is still fighting to continue things the way it is, fighting to find that magic bullet, that simple solution, so I don't have to change anything. I don't have to mass. Again, because for two reasons. One, human nature. We resist change. It's natural, but also is because change in itself is difficult, and changing these complex systems, it's even more difficult because it takes, as I mentioned, same way we mentioned with Salmonella, it takes collaboration, different links of that chain, or different teams. Even if you're just working in your link, there are multiple teams involved. That leads to communication, that leads to engagement. And above all this we're talking a lot about the execution. We need to think that this needs to come to a higher level. You involve all the leaders of these large, complex organizations. They have to start thinking more in their business model. And honestly, it's not just thinking on these tools, on these challenges specifically. I think the whole industry today, particularly in the monogastric side, we are, I would say, ripe for change. We are at some point today that it's getting harder and harder and harder, not only from the production side to keep improving and sustaining how things are done until now, but also from the supply side, how can you, it's getting to a point of high commoditization, challenges for suppliers to invest. So you start getting caught in that catch 22 in terms of yeah, I need to invest in new technologies, but if I invest, I'm not going to get the return on that investment. So I'm just going to try to keep selling the same thing over and over again. And then, in the other hand, the customer, the producer say, well, I'm not paying for more because my margins are tight, but I need new technologies, but I can't afford paying for that new technology. It becomes a rat race. And I think in the industry as a whole today, it's in that situation. We reached a point where we solved a lot of the simple problems. And now we are facing this more complex scenario with difficult multifactorial challenges, plus the economy, financial side of the business. I think we are getting to a point that's soon things will have to change.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And as also you say, change is slow, right? So it takes time, but we definitely need more stakeholders or parts or
Mm-hmm.
ideas to align up to a certain extent when we start allowing change to happen, okay? But we'll see how that goes. It'll definitely take a lot of time and a lot of changing in that paradigm, as you say. So it's been quite an insightful talk, Marcos. I really appreciate your time and agreeing to share such interesting insights with us. I really hope we can have you back soon, discussing this even further. So on behalf of our team at NutriNews, we would like to thank you, and on behalf of our audience as well, thank you for this talk and for your time. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate the opportunity and to share my thoughts, my views. I hope they are insightful and creates or triggers new thoughts in your audience. And it will be a pleasure at some point if we can want to come back. We can tease many different points that we discussed today. Thank you for the opportunity.
For sure. Looking forward to another talk soon. So thank you again, and thank you to all our audience, and it'll be until next time. Bye.
Thank you.